Hey there, friends and family. Thanks for coming back to the podcast. I'm adding just a little piece to the podcast interview starting this week where I'm going to give a brief introduction at the beginning just to familiarize the listeners with the guest a little bit more before we get started. I'll keep that brief. We'll get into our conversation, and then at the end, I'll sort of have a wrap-up just of thoughts that occurred to me after re-listening to the podcast, some of the things that stuck with me from the podcast, because I'm always learning something from everybody that I talk to, even if it's somebody who's already a good friend. I learn something from sitting down with them in this format and take away some things, and I really like to reflect on things anytime I talk to somebody and kind of let those thoughts kind of rattle around in my head for a while, so then that gives me a chance to kind of do a wrap-up at the end. But as we get started here, I was able to sit down with a friend of mine and an artist based out of Austin, Minnesota, Mr. Jon Kittleson. Jon Kittleson is an amazing guy. His artwork is amazing. Great artist and an even better man. And he talked a little bit in our podcast about his artwork, about some of the challenges that he's faced specifically with some rare and very challenging health situations. So I had a really inspiring talk with him, really enjoyable talk with him, and we'll roll that right now. Okay, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm here with a friend of mine, artist, Mr. Jon Kittleson. How you doing, man?
Hello, I'm here.
Well, I appreciate you being on, and it was nice to sit down and talk to you, and want to go through a bunch of different things, some of your artwork and stuff like that, but first maybe just a little bit on your background. Now, you grew up in Virginia, is that right?
Yes, I lived there for about most of my high school.
All the way through high school, you lived in Virginia Beach, is that right?
Yes.
And then, now if I remember just from a little bit that we've talked, and then on your website and stuff too, there's some of your, like under the About category on your website, you mentioned you got a pretty significant injury when you were pretty young, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And what happened there?
Was this a wrestling accident?
And what happened with that accident?
Well, so it was I think it was in 8th grade. The guy did a crossface on me, and he just put a lot of weight on my neck, and so it made my disc in my neck rotate, and which caused it to look like I had a stroke. And so that was a permanent problem on my left side.
Really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did that impact, the things you were doing athletically? Athletics kind of done at that point then?
Yeah, it just came to an end, just like that.
Yeah. And am I right? And that's kind of when you started getting more into art. Is that right?
Yeah, I just became more interested in art at that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then you were just doing it in like middle school, high school art classes, that sort of thing?
Yep.
And then you went on, after high school, went on to community college, got a graphic arts degree. Is that right?
Yes.
And so what were some of the things that you were doing in graphic arts at that time?
Just your computer layout stuff, your Photoshop, Illustrator, stuff like that.
Sure. And then eventually you moved to the Midwest.
Yeah.
What was kind of the impetus for moving to the Midwest?
Well, I'd always had an interest in cows. And my grandfather had a bunch of cows, and he had passed away, so I was just the one that had just come out here and decided to take care of the cows.
Take care of the cows.
Yeah.
And so you're still doing artwork at this time, though?
Not as much, no.
No. When you were doing art, like in high school and college, I mean, were you just doing stuff sort of for the art classes, whatever your teacher, had for projects, things like that?
Yeah, but I actually had my first art show in Virginia as well,
Okay.
and that went really well. And then I had a few different other art festivals.
And what kind of artwork were you doing at the time?
More just abstract stuff.
Abstract, and what kind of media?
Oh, just I use oil pastels.
Sure. And I mean, so when you're doing abstract, are you working abstractions off of different things, different people, different whatever? Is it all kind of just out of your mind?
No, I mean I just took like some images that I was working with class, and I just would make it into some sort of something new and fresh.
Sure, sure. And so you had a show or a couple shows in Virginia.
Yeah.
And then you moved back, or not moved back, but you moved to the Midwest.
Yeah, all the way from Virginia to Iowa.
How was that transition?
That was very different because I do remember my first winter, and that was a hard winter for me.
I imagine. We were just talking about we're in the midst of a seemingly long winter this year where we've been dumped on with snow, and it's March 1st and we still have snow everywhere. But yeah, I imagine that's a transition. Other things, were there other things that were just sort of culturally different about moving to the Midwest?
Well, just these small towns in comparison to like living around, like 700,000 people.
Right.
Like just these small, and you have to drive every little town in order to get there.
Right. And so the whole time that you've been doing, this artwork, and you come back and start working with cattle and stuff, you're still dealing with some of the effects of that injury from wrestling, right?
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, how did that impact the things that you were doing, not only physically, but like mentally? What were some of the things to kind of overcome as you're working with that, as you're getting into artwork? Was that affecting a lot of things at that point or not?
I just couldn't move. My body wouldn't move as fluently as before.
Sure.
So I had to be a little more able to take a little more time in order to get somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're back here working, doing the cattle thing, the kind of the farm thing, that sort of thing, and then you wind up having another health thing come up. And so I get that right. It's Rapid Onset Dystonia Parkinsonism. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a lot of words.
It's a mouthful, yeah. So just sort of briefly, for people who don't know, kind of what is that?
It's a neurological and muscular disorder. It affects my my speech. It affects my balance, and it affects my dexterity.
Sure. It's sort of, I mean, just to give people a reference, it's sort of, symptoms are like Parkinson's.
Yeah.
It's not Parkinson's, but
No.
has similar symptoms.
Yeah, I have similar characteristics. Yeah.
Sure. And I think just from talking to you before, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, it's called Rapid Onset Dystonia. The symptoms appear very quickly, so it progresses pretty quickly, but then it kind of stops, right? It's not like Parkinson's where it just keeps getting worse. Is that right?
Yeah, it literally came on within 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
So how do you first start noticing this?
Literally, like my coworkers thought I had a stroke.
Really?
And they're like, you should. And I was like, no, I didn't have a stroke. And so I went to Mayo Clinic, and they did a lot of testing on me, and it took a while, but they finally were able to diagnose that condition.
Huh. That's pretty. How old were you at this time?
Like 27.
Sure. That's pretty crazy. That's a lot of like stuff to go through already by the time you're 27. I mean, you already had the one injury that, took some overcoming physically, mentally, and then now you've got this condition. So, what's sort of your mindset initially when that comes on? I mean, it's sort of I imagine it's not a real common thing.
No, it's actually rather rare,
Yeah.
and so I didn't know. I had no idea what to do because I couldn't work my job anymore because it was a labor intensive job.
Right.
So so I had to just do something different.
So, I mean, so what was the mindset? What were you thinking you were going to do at that point?
I don't know. I ended up focusing on my art.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a plan right away.
Sure. Sure. Were there things that you kind of went to as sort of like a little bit of a pick me up in that area? I mean, you and I have talked about before. I've had, some different health things too. Certainly not the same types of things or sort of life altering in that way, but just, I remember looking for different things like, okay, well, this is sort of like picked up my spirits or something I could kind of pour myself into. Were you looking for some of those same things?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some things that you found that were helpful?
Just sort of keeping me a little more positive, hanging out with youth,
Oh, yeah.
or just hanging out with people at the nursing home. Sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, for me, when I was going through some of those health things or whatever, it was still really important for me to keep teaching, like just being around young people and like that. You sort of that positive energy, that life,
Sure.
I thought was great, and then sort of still feeling like I was making a significant contribution with
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah.
So where does you start focusing on your art more? But when did you really start like, okay, hey, this is kind of what I'm going to pour myself into is the art side of things?
Well, mainly after I started realizing that this is going to be a condition I'm going to have,
Right.
and I was like, well, I'm going to have to. So around that time, I started really focusing on my art at that time.
Sure. And let's talk about your art a little bit. Did you start right away, sort of stylistically, with the stuff that you're still doing now in terms of like use of color and media and that sort of thing, or was it kind of progressing into that?
It was definitely progressing into it. I do a lot of head portraits right now, but it was kind of just your basic portrait of a dog,
Yep.
and then when I first started, and then as it just progressed into something more color now.
Sure. Um, what we're gonna put links on on all the SoundCloud and iTunes and YouTube and all that stuff to your website so people can see your artwork. Go there and check that out if you go to jonkittleson.com. But people can kind of look at it as we're talking. But you do use a lot of color. I just always think it's really awesome. Like the images that you create, there's a lot of different color, and I don't know if you'd call it sort of like it's almost like an impressionistic type of style. Does that sound about right?
Sure, yeah.
Where does that, come from? Is that something that you were purposely trying to kind of create something stylistically that was a little different, or were you always attracted to sort of like the impressionistic type of artwork, or did it just sort of come out as you were doing those things?
I mean, like with any artist, they have to find their own style or find their own look,
Right.
and it took a while for me to gain that sort of look that I have now as an artist. I mean, it has more to do with your persistence and just what you're willing to just sort of try
Right.
and what you feel comfortable with after a while. And I've been very blessed with as an artist. I've been finding the right sort of colors, in my portraits.
Sure. when you're doing something, are you thinking ahead of time, like you planning out the colors that will go together, or like complementary colors or things like that?
Um, not necessarily. I try to look at like so I work from a 2-dimensional form
Yep.
on paper, and I try to do my best to make it look 3-dimensional.
Sure. So you're still thinking about like color gradients, meaning like where it's dark, it's still going to be dark. Where it's light, it's still going to be light, but you're changing up the color aspect.
Yep.
So, and then you work pretty much exclusively with colored pencil now for all these portraits and stuff.
Yep.
Where did the colored pencil come from? Was it like just an easier media to work with?
For me it is.
Yeah.
Because I have dexterity issues. So holding pencils, I've had to learn how to hold them differently.
Sure.
It still accomplishes the same thing. I just have to hold it differently.
Sure. What was that a big transition? I mean, I think that'd be very difficult as someone who like paints and draws. You know, like I have the way that I hold a pencil. I mean, was that in itself just a big transition of like, oh man, how can I move this thing now with the dexterity ability that I have?
Like literally, you have to just do the best you can, and that is what I found to suit it.
Right. Yeah. You just kind of found the thing that worked.
Yeah, just the best, and I don't use pencils. I don't use those hand pencil sharpeners.
Okay.
I have to have electric sharpener.
Oh, to just for the dexterity to try and sharpen it.
Yeah.
So then when you're doing it, you know, I've seen you, work a little bit. It was nice when you were living in St. Answer, you'd come up to the art room once in a while where I teach art. And it was cool. You just do some art and kind of hang out with everybody as we were doing our classroom art stuff. So I've seen you work a little bit. Is there much like editing as you're doing things? I mean, I'm always just impressed watching you work as you're laying in the different color. There doesn't seem to be a lot of like erasing something and changing it and going back. Is there ever much of that process, or it's kind of just continually laying in the colors till you're getting the shape that you want?
No, I just sort of go with different layers, and then I just sort of I've been doing it long enough to kind of have a better idea what I'm doing.
Right.
But all it is just you just get a nice color, and you kind of go from there.
Sure. Do you do sort of an initial outline of what the image is? I mean, if you're doing a dog, say, are you doing sort of an initial outline of the shape of the dog and then you're laying in the color?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going back in and adding those color values and
Oh,
things.
yeah.
So you mentioned you do a lot of pet portraits.
Mm-hmm.
You've done a lot of other things, but what kind of got you into that, or what drew you to doing animals, particularly doing sort of these pet portraits?
Well, to be honest, like as an artist, you have to find something that pays money.
Right.
And portraits were something I just actually my wife suggested I should just do something like that.
Sure.
And I was like, so I was willing to try it out, and yeah. And so I've done a lot of them since then.
Yeah. And that, I know that can be a difficult thing, when you're working in the fine arts, if you're, trying to make money off it and that sort of things. What are some of the things that you do then to market? We mentioned like the website and stuff, but are you, then trying to get into art shows, trying to do different things like that?
Yeah, and I do a lot of, because I do a lot of dog portraits. I go to a lot of dog events or dog shows or dog stuff like that, and then I just talk to people about what the service I have.
Sure, just sort of that face-to-face networking a little bit, and
Sure.
word gets out some.
Mm-hmm.
Is that ever? That's something that I don't know. Sometimes I don't think I'm very good with, like the sort of face-to-face networking. Was that something that you kind of had to get used to, or that kind of came pretty naturally, just talking to people about the things that you were doing and what you want to do with your art?
Well, yeah, it definitely came with the process of being an artist.
Sure.
You definitely have to learn how to talk to people, and basically sell your art. Because
Right.
it does no good, in your house. You know, unless
Just
you,
have a room filling up with your own artwork.
yeah.
So, do you still have time to do just things that are sort of your own at random, or are you most of the time doing commission stuff for people now?
Well, I just started doing more art for feature shows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So stuff that you'll have on display, like when you go to something, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So then you're kind of trying to stockpile, or you're trying to stockpile like some different stuff to show some different types of things that you've done, or I mean, doing a lot of different animal things to kind of display
Well,
that.
so I'm trying to get into a show, and so I have to do new art in order to be juried in.
Okay. And then, so if you're getting into a show like that, I mean, there's a submission process, like you're sending in pictures of your stuff and seeing
Yeah,
if you get
it's
in.
it's an online application.
Okay, okay. And then, how are you getting? I mean, are you getting commissions from people just from at these shows, or people going to your website and getting a hold of you to do commissions and stuff?
Well, I just go and talk to people.
Sure,
And so yeah.
gotcha. So if you're gonna, it's interesting as an art teacher. It's always nice when I have some students who, are really interested in visual arts, but it always seems like something that's not like a viable career option. You know what I mean? And it is sort of a difficult thing, like you talked about, getting started and making those connections. But for students who want to pursue stuff like that, because you've done sort of the degree route in graphic design and doing the fine art stuff, do you have advice for people who are like, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to do this art thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just get your degree,
Yeah, sure.
and then and then if you're an artist, I mean, that's wonderful. But just keep working on the side, and then just do this art things to try to build up your name.
Build up your name.
Yeah, and so hopefully eventually you can like quit your day job
Right.
and focus on your art.
Yeah. So I think that's really good advice. And I think a big part of it, like you said, is you just got to keep working at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's a thing, no matter what it is, people run into. They want some results right away, and
Yeah.
that's usually not in the cards. So you have to keep hammering away at it. That's really good. And you mentioned, kind of building up your name. What are some things that you try to do, like beyond the networking? Like, what do you want your artwork to sort of represent, or when people think of, hey, it's a Jon Kittleson piece, what do you want them to sort of think of you and the artwork?
Just probably the ability to overcome like things in your life, and then you're able to um, just see positive things,
Yeah,
through hard work and through discipline. And so I would say my art is just a combination of just being able to overcome things and just staying positive after changing yourself like that.
right. What about art specifically was sort of the place where you found some solace? I mean, was it sort of a therapeutic thing as you got into it?
Oh yeah, I was able to create and just let my my perhaps my bad day go to rest,
Sure.
and just sort of just focus on creativity and doing something that I enjoy doing. And it just so happens that I was able to do some art for someone and get paid for it. So then that just sort of manifested into something different.
Sure.
But yeah, it started out being just a wonderful opportunity for me to focus on something I enjoy doing.
Right. And I always think too that the idea of creating something that didn't exist before, I find kind of I don't know if it's therapeutic or it's a really cool thing. Like you had this idea, you have sort of a way of picturing something, and then you make something, and then it's something that exists that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
So, as you were, transitioning into like people starting to buy your artwork and stuff like that, how did that, I guess, direct some of your goals for like, okay, here's what I want to do next? Or how did you start to build up some of that? Or how did you get into the website and like all those sorts of things?
Well, just as a professional artist or someone who's trying to become a professional artist, you gotta have some sort of website.
Right.
Yeah, so other people that you don't know can see your stuff.
Right.
And you just want to be more as professional as possible.
Right.
And you just want to give off that, this is what I enjoy doing. And so
then logistically, if say somebody gets a hold of you, it's either somebody that you meet at an art show or somebody contacts you and they want a portrait done. Let's say a pet, because you do a lot of those. What's the process? And then are they sending you some different pictures that you can look at to be like, this would probably work best, back and forth like that? Or is it kind of like, hey, here's the image that I want, then you kind of go from there?
it depends on the person. Sometimes this is all the pictures they have.
Right.
Sometimes I try to sway them into thinking a certain type of picture.
Sure.
But it all comes down to like what they're looking for. Like I really try to take their needs or what they're trying to do with the artwork, into effect when I do my artwork.
Yep.
But it still is my artwork that I'm trying to, just my style.
Right.
So they definitely should know the style that I have. And so it tends to be a wonderful thing when you have someone who has to asks you to do art for them.
Yeah. And is that a point of satisfaction or pride too when you get something done and send to somebody like, hey, like that's going to be hanging up on somebody's wall, or that's going to be something that they cherish as whether it's a memory of a pet or something like that?
Yeah, it's an awesome feeling.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for 5 years, and it's still an awesome feeling that when people because I will mail stuff to them.
Right.
And then I'll get these pictures of them of it on their wall. I think it's such an awesome thing to see my art on someone's wall. I think that's really cool.
That is pretty cool. Did you ever find time? Well, like you talked about your style. I mean, people need to understand that this is the style that you're doing. I find sometimes just like as an art teacher, a lot of times you'll have people. People contact me like, hey, would you want to like paint this for me or like draw this for me or whatever? And it's always, well intended, so I don't mean it to sound like bad about anybody. But, some people be like, hey, would you want to like paint this thing for me? And there's sometimes be like, that's not really my wheelhouse. Like art is such a broad thing, like that's not the way that I draw or paint or, something like that. Did you ever run into that as you were kind of trying to build your name, build your style, where somebody would want something and you kind of had to be like, well, but like this is the art that I'm doing. It's sort of this impressionistic color, type of thing, and they wanted something totally different?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, you don't want to turn anyone down.
Sure.
Especially when you're up and coming. But yeah, I have people asking to do like their houses and so I did the best I could. But it probably wasn't what they wanted. But that's
you did do what you can. Yeah.
Just no.
So especially when you're building up your name, you kind of the opinion that like you don't turn any work down. You take every opportunity that you can.
Oh yeah. You just sort of you just take it and then you just do the best you can, and then you just sort of go on, and you sort of learn from those different opportunities, and then you sort of keep focusing on what you want to do, as an artist.
Sure.
No.
So sometimes I think that's a thing that creative people, struggle with sometimes too, or especially if you're doing visual arts, is this idea of like, you have in the back of your head where you ultimately want to go, but sometimes you have to do some of that work that maybe wouldn't be your top choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, like I work with young people as a, middle school, high school art teacher, and I'll see that sometimes is sort of a lot of people, I don't really want to do it if it's not like my favorite thing to do, but that is an opportunity to learn and grow too. Like I like the way that you said it. You said you take the opportunity and then you do the best that you can. And so is that how you look at, every job that you're taking? Hey, this is another opportunity for me to grow in my craft and grow sort of the brand that I'm creating?
Sure, why not? Like, it's just like someone's paying you to work for them.
Yeah.
And they could, and there are thousands of artists out there do the same type of thing you do.
Right.
So if you get any work at all, and I think that's a entirely huge blessing.
Sure.
So even if it's not the thing that you enjoy doing, like dogs or whatever you enjoy doing, you should say like, oh wow, I have a portrait to do, I have art to do.
Sure. Have you found then though, after really doing this specifically for 5 years, has it gotten to a point now where it is a little more like people are coming in knowing sort of the type of work that you do, so now they're seeking you out because of that?
So it still takes a lot of work. It's not like I can just stop. I mean, it still takes a lot of work in order to get your name out there, like more than just your local area or your friends.
Yep.
So it still takes a lot of work in order to get out of that circle of those people. So you have to do perhaps a lot of social media stuff, and you have to perhaps just go and just go to different areas that you might not go to.
Right. So then, back to kind of just the work specifically, we're sitting in your kind of office space where you work, and just kind of looking around at some of the pieces. Are you typically working at a similar size when you're working?
Oh yeah, I do 11 by 14 size.
11 by 14. That's everything's 11 by 14.
Well, that's just a standard size I work out of.
Sure. Yep.
And if someone wants something smaller or something bigger, that's just different.
Right.
But, yeah.
But when you're, creating something on your own, or when you're mocking something up that, people want, it's 11 by 14.
Yeah.
And then, so if you're sending something out to somebody, are you then, so you get the finished product and then you are mailing that out to them, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I put a mat on there so it looks really nice.
Sure.
And then, I just box it up here at my house and mail it to the address.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. How long, I know different things obviously take different amounts of time, but how long, say typically, if you're doing like, say, a dog portrait, something that you've done a lot of, like how many hours are you putting into that picture?
It takes about 6 to 8 hours.
6 to 8. Gotcha. That's pretty good. So then, like, say in a given week, like, what does your schedule look like working on artwork?
I try. The words try. I really try to do like 2 hours a day.
Sure.
And really spend time on my art and try to get something done every day.
Right. And so, you work at a school also.
Yeah.
Yep. And so you work during the day, and then if I understand, so then in the afternoon you're coming home, and then that's kind of your time when you're working on art stuff.
Yep.
And then so 2 hours a day. Is that something where, is 2 hours sort of about the limit of like physically kind of getting tired at that point, or mentally like, yeah, 2 hours is about as much as I want to work on it?
Well, it depends on like if it's it just depends on what kind of stage I'm at.
Sure.
If I'm almost done, then just go ahead and get done.
Right.
If I just start, then I'll just be done that day.
Yeah.
Or if I whatever. Sometimes I need to. I'm in a rush.
Yep.
And I just need to get something done like just now. Other times I don't have a deadline. No.
Yeah.
So it just depends on things.
Sure. How busy are you lately with like orders from stuff? I mean, how many do you kind of have going on at one time?
As of late, I've had a few.
Yep.
And then I typically range about a couple a month.
Sure.
So that's then that's been over an average of about 2 a month.
Sure. Where would you, what are your goals? Where would you like to see the art stuff go? What do you kind of want to do next?
Well, I don't know. I for starters, I just like to have a consistent 2 or 3 a month.
Yeah.
For even up to 6 months, when you have that consistency.
Yep.
I don't quite have that of yet. And then in terms of even farther goals, I would like to just get into do more bigger shows around the country.
Oh yeah.
So I can get different audience.
Yeah.
So, but as an artist, you have to think like bigger thoughts, bigger ideas.
Sure.
And sort of like somehow implement those ideas.
Yep.
It may take years. It may take a while, but hey, you have a focus and a goal to get there at some point.
Right.
So.
And is that just what you try to stay focused on when it does, seem like a long process? When it is a couple of years, you're just like, this is the goal, so the time frame maybe doesn't matter as much?
Well, so yeah, I really try to focus on my art, like, as soon as I can, so that I can get some art done, so I can just sort of work my way up to that deadline.
Yep.
Because the deadline for the show I'm working for is in May.
Yep.
So I'm just slowly trying to work toward that deadline.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I had to have about 20 pieces done.
For this art show that you're talking about, yeah. So you're submitting stuff for an art show right now. We were talking about this beforehand, off mic, just sort of the process of that. So as you're getting, different art shows are different, but for this particular one, what is this art show? Can you say what this art show is?
It's up in Duluth.
In Duluth, Minnesota. So yeah, I guess to clarify for people listening, a lot of our listeners are around here, but there's others from other places. So you live in Austin, Minnesota, southern Minnesota. Yeah. And so like Rochester is relatively close. But so this is a show up in Duluth, Minnesota, which is that's up farther north if you're not familiar. It's getting closer to Canada, but beautiful up there. And so when you go to get into a show like this, so you said for this show you have to have 20 pieces of artwork.
No, I just need 5.
Oh, okay.
In order to fly.
Okay.
You want to have at least 20 because you have to because they're for sale.
Oh, on display at the show.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I have until August to have those 20 done.
Okay. So just for people listening unfamiliar with the process, so you submit just like digital pictures as an online application.
Yeah.
You're submitting pictures of 5 pieces of work.
Yeah.
And then you get accepted into a show.
Mm-hmm.
And then this one has the expectation you have 20 pieces of art at least that are going to be on display, for sale, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then the show is in August?
Yeah, I think the first weekend of August.
Okay, that's cool. And then is it just like a big outdoor art show? Is it
Yeah,
inside of it, a big
yeah,
outdoor?
just you have the tents and all that stuff.
Sure. Is it sort of an all arts event, or is it just fine art stuff? I mean, I've been to some, and there's music and all sorts of
Yeah,
different things, vendors,
I mean
whatever.
it's right on the lake,
Oh, okay.
so it's a. I think this is one of the biggest art shows in the area.
Okay. Is it down by like the pier and all that
Yeah,
stuff
I think
in
so.
Duluth?
It's,
That's pretty cool down there. I like that a lot. I stopped there last summer. I came down through Duluth. I was up camping and stuff, and I'd only ever been to Duluth before to play football in college, so it was nice to go and see it from a different light. But yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Are you? So I mean, that's kind of the next immediate show goal, and then that's kind of what you want to keep doing is trying to get into some more
yeah,
shows.
yeah. I haven't done shows in a long time, and so I'm trying to get into doing that again.
Right.
I did more shows in Virginia,
Sure.
and then it became more difficult when I started this condition.
Yep.
But then so then I'm gonna try it again
Sure. I think that's
this
awesome.
summer.
And you talked about just, you know, I'm always inspired by you. Seem to handle it. And I don't even really think about it very much, like facing the rapid onset dystonia, that sort of thing. What challenges does that add for trying to travel and do some of these things? I know you do travel a bit, but what challenges arise for that?
So I use a chair, a power chair,
Yep.
and there's just some challenges to setting things up, and so yeah, I mean sure, I mean but as long as you ask for help,
Right.
there's typically someone that can help.
Sure. Was that ever a difficult thing early on? I'm always bad with asking for help. I'm the guy who usually will like do something poorly on my own because I don't want to ask for help. Was that difficult at first or not?
Yeah, I would say yeah, it was. I mean, you're sure, but you have to kind of get over your pride and go and just ask for help, and most people can see
Right.
see that you need help, and so they're willing to help. So
Yeah.
but a lot of times it's you're just willing to ask for help.
Sure. Well, then I've seen your van is a pretty cool setup. You've got your van that your power chair drives into and locks into place.
Yeah.
And then you drive with the regular, controls. That's not adapted at all. It's just adapted for the chair. So that's nice for getting around locally.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're flying or something, what challenges does that bring up?
Well, I have to use my walker,
Okay.
and then I have to be like wheeled down the terminal,
Sure.
and then I have to get on the airplane.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it can be challenging, but I can still do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you go to like this art show in Duluth, for instance, does getting into one bigger show like this kind of open the door to more shows? You just make more connections, or then
Sure.
you can kind of throw it on the resume that you were at like this show type of thing?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
then you see, yeah, that's how things typically work. You you get in one show, and then you may get in a different show. But a lot of these shows want original artwork,
Yep.
so you can't transfer like certain art to another show, another show.
Right.
So
right.
they want new art all the time.
Gotcha. So what original type stuff are you? So I suppose that kind of adds a little bit of another time constraint if you're making something for people that's commissioned work that you're going to mail out, but then you have to make these other pieces too that you want to take to the show. Is that kind of, you're doubling up your work a little bit?
Yeah.
When you're making stuff for, say, the Duluth show, are you still focusing on like the pet portrait types of things? Are you trying to show some other types of stuff too? You want a little variety, or try to focus in on like, hey, this is kind of my wheelhouse. This is, you know, what I'm kind of trying to represent.
No, I've actually done a bunch of sailboats.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen some of those sailboats. Those are pretty cool. So just showing like some different stuff too.
Yeah.
And then I imagine, I mean, will you show some pet things and stuff there
Sure,
too?
yeah. But a lot of times for a festival, you want to have stuff to sell, not stuff to get orders for.
Okay.
So you want to be able to sell something to someone,
Sure.
rather than get orders from someone.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes it works. I mean, sure, I can mention it to someone and say, hey, I'm also a portrait artist.
Sure.
But they want a lot of times people want to buy something.
Yeah. So at the day of the show, I mean, the focus is kind of like moving some merchandise right then.
Sure.
So are you then trying to think of creating stuff that's maybe kind of a broad appeal, or, you know, you want to offer a variety to try and catch somebody's eye and move some things?
Yeah, I want to see what sells,
Yep.
and I want to see what people are interested in buying,
Sure.
and I'll probably do different things like sailboats or lighthouses, stuff like that.
Sure.
To try to see what are interested in, and maybe even the following year, if I go again, then I'll know.
Yeah. Gives you a chance, kind of a litmus test. You get to test the waters a little bit and see what sells.
And then I should be able to see different clientele. And sure.
Are you thinking, like with Duluth specifically, they do have the lighthouse and stuff there? I mean, so is that part of the thought process? You're thinking like, people in Duluth, this may have some appeal, sort of the sailboat, the lighthouse, that sort of thing, or not really?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good like sailboat area.
Yeah.
People love sailboats. People love lighthouses.
Sure.
And so you targeting that area, with the specific artwork.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, the reason why I go to dog shows is because I can target those people.
Sure.
And so that's how you're able to sell art, is targeting the customer.
Yeah, you're finding the market.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I didn't have a lot of other stuff, man. Do you have anything else?
No, I just thank you for inviting me on your podcast.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. I enjoy talking to you every time we get to hang out, which isn't as often as we'd like, but I appreciate it. And just to remind everybody, so we will put Jon's website, which is jonkittleson.com, and that'll be in the description for this podcast on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on YouTube, on my website. That'll all be there. So you can go right to Jon's website, and you'll be able to see on your website there's the links to all the social media stuff and all that, to like your Etsy account, all those things. And then you can see a lot of Jon's artwork. So if nothing else, I really recommend go check that out, see Jon's artwork, check out his About page. You've heard a little bit of his story, which is always inspiring to me, and his positive attitude. So thanks again for being on, and thanks everybody for listening.
No, thank you.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Jon share his story, some of his story, and a little about his artwork. I know I sure enjoyed talking to him. And now, just for our little wrap session at the end, this is something I decided to do in part because I don't know that I'm very good at interviewing all the time when we're doing these. And in fact, I'm pretty certain I'm not always so good at that. So it's nice to have those conversations, but I think in general, in conversation, I tend to like to hear what somebody has to say and then kind of think about that for a while. I'm maybe not the quickest with my thought process or the way that I talk when I record something individually. I know my youngest brother, who's been on the podcast, will play my recordings at 1.5 speed to save time because I'm not the fastest talker. But every time I sit down and do one of these interviews with somebody, it's a great thing for me because even if we're friends, the podcast type thing sort of forces a little deeper conversation. Maybe they're conversations that we've had or, little pieces of those conversations. But, it's a great thing to just set aside time to just sit down and talk. And we get the bit while we're actually recording, but then there's always sort of the before and after where we're very informally talking too. And I always take a lot of things away from those. And when I would re-listen to one of these podcast interviews, I typically would listen to it once, or I still just listen to it one time through to make sure the sound and everything is okay. But I would kind of just listen to it for that, for the sound. I don't particularly like hearing my voice on a recording, so it's just sort of for that. But some of the things that would come up during interview would kind of be rattling around in my head anyway, and I've been trying to just re-listen to it after the recording a little more closely. One, to be critical of myself, to clean up areas where I stumble over words or way that I could ask questions better, keep a conversation going a little better so that hopefully these continue to improve. But also, I come away after listening to it with a lot of really great things that the guests had said. And then just for myself, I like to revisit them and think about them a little bit. So I want to do that now just with some of the stuff that Jon talked about. So if you're tired of listening to me talk, by all means, go ahead and shut this part off. But so here's some of my thoughts just with talking to Jon. I made a few notes as I was re-listening, and one of the things that he talked about when trying to stay positive, especially after being diagnosed with Rapid Onset Dystonia Parkinsonism, was hanging out with youth. That kind of struck me. Jon works at a school during the mornings and then does his artwork, and he hit on something that really connected with me, because even when I was going through a lot of my health issues, or I was in kind of the deepest point of it, even when I didn't feel very good physically, it was very important for me to still go to school, to teach and to coach, because one, it's something I love to do, but I think there is just a life, a vitality, a vibrance that comes with working with young people. I've had the privilege to work with some teachers who've been in the education game for a really long time, and the ones who I admire the most and take the most away from are those who still have that youthful exuberance about them. And I think that can be a really powerful thing when you work with and connect with young people. So that stuck out to me right away as he was talking. The other thing, just sort of some little quotes. I like little aphorisms, little pearls of wisdom that, come from anywhere. And that was part of the reason I wanted to start this podcast, was just this idea of, everybody's an expert in something. Everyone has insight into something, and we don't always know people's stories or their insight, and we can always take a lot of good things away. So some of the other things that Jon talked about, I liked, he said something to the effect of, you just do the best you can. And he was talking about the challenge of learning how to hold a pencil in a different way to do his artwork after his dystonia set in. And, it's little things like that that so many of us take for granted. And I always appreciate Jon's point of view Always so positive and just talking about you do the best you can. That's the way it is. He mentioned in another part just talking about diving into his artwork when he realized this was it, that he had this condition. The condition was something he was going to have to live with. So I really liked that, his positive attitude all the time, and that's something that he talked about is he wanted to be known for or have his artwork reflect just keeping a positive attitude and overcoming challenges. And to me, that's really how I picture Jon, and I think that's just an incredible attitude for everyone. A few other things that he talked about was when doing his artwork, and I think the quote or how I wrote it down was, he could go and do his artwork and let my bad day go to rest. I just thought that was a powerful little aphorism, especially with, if I'm a creative person, so that's kind of how I think of those things too. If I'm able to sit down and write or draw or fiddle around on the guitar or something like that, those creative endeavors a lot of times provide that opportunity to let my bad day go to rest. I love the way that Jon phrased that. Just being able to pour into something that way and maybe process some negative feelings or experiences or let them go for a little while. I know when I was in the worst parts of my physical health issues is when I really started pouring a lot more into writing, because there was something therapeutic about it and something about those health issues that made the creative process seem all the more relevant and important. So I really loved that quote by Jon. I also he just talked about opportunity a lot. Even in situations that, maybe a lot of people wouldn't approach as always a positive thing, whether it was a simple thing like somebody wanted a piece of art commission that's not normally what he would do. Jon described it as an opportunity to create something for someone else, an opportunity to practice his craft. And I think that's great. A lot of times I feel all people, I'm guilty of it too. We don't always want to be uncomfortable, or we don't always want to do those things that aren't the things we think we'll enjoy doing or the things we know we'll enjoy doing. But if we can frame everything as an opportunity, even difficult situations or even things that on the outside aren't our preferred option, if we can frame those things as an opportunity, I think that's a really powerful thing as well. Jon said a few times that, it's a blessing to create art for other people, and he feels blessed and things like that. That's something he echoed when we were talking off mic too. And I always think that's so wonderful when you see somebody like Jon who has clearly faced some challenges. He had a really life-changing freak injury as a middle schooler that altered the course of his life. And then at 27 years old, gets this rare and life-changing medical diagnosis and continues to stay positive and see the blessings that he has. Jon talked about his traveling and things like that, and even said things like, yeah, it can be a little difficult on an airplane, but he can still do it. So I appreciate that very much as well. Another quote that I wrote from Jon, and hopefully I got it fairly close, just as I was jotting down listening to it, but he says, "As an artist, you have to think bigger thoughts. I just think that's a really beautiful quote too, that, as a creative person, as somebody who likes to pour themselves into art, and art could mean all manner of things. I just like that idea of you have to think bigger thoughts. And, whether that could be in the context of talking about growing your brand, your name, your artwork, those sorts of things, or just in life. I like the idea of thinking outside the box and framing things in a different way and thinking sort of grandiose things. So I really like that quote. As an artist, you have to think bigger thoughts. Just the last couple of things. I appreciated Jon also talking about asking for help. That's a really difficult thing to do for a lot of people. I know that's a very difficult thing for me to do. I don't particularly like asking people for help. And I've tried to get better with it as I've gotten a little older, even if it's just a home construction project or something like that. It's amazing, by having one other person helping me, it's doubling the manpower, but it seems that it makes things 4 times easier. But I've always struggled with that, still struggle with that, just to ask people for help with things. And, part of it is I like to be self-reliant, and I know a lot of people do as well. But Jon framed that in a powerful way, I think, when he just said, talked about getting over one's pride and asking for help when we need help. And the last thing that I kind of jotted down, I kind of just, shot down a bunch of different notes, was just Jon's work ethic. He said at one point, just keep working. And he talked about trying to work on art for 2 hours a day. And I think that's a great thing because you could look at it 2 different ways. I think, maybe some people would hear that and go well, 2 hours a day maybe isn't that much if it's something you're really trying to focus on. But I think it was Earl Nightingale who did a lot of motivational speaking stuff. He's kind of a, older motivational speaker, but has some great stuff that you can still find on YouTube and things. But I think it was Earl Nightingale who said, if you spent an extra hour a day studying your craft, you'd be a national expert in under 5 years. So that consistency, I think, is so important. Jon talked about trying to work on art for 2 hours a day. Well, if you're doing 2 hours a day, you're going to be an expert. If you can consistently do that day in, day out, and there'll be some days maybe where that doesn't work out or you're busy and things come up, but if you can consistently do that, that just compounds those skills that you develop. So I thought that was great. And, Jon said a couple times about just keep working and that sort of thing. And then I guess the very last thing, I had one more thing written down here. He said, build up your name. And, that could be taken as a literal idea of just if you're trying to market yourself, if you're doing, any type of endeavor, a business, artwork, whatever it might be, trying to build up your name, just getting name recognition. But I also like just that idea of what does your name stand for? What does our name represent? And I asked Jon that, he said he wants to, be known as someone who's always positive and a message of overcoming difficult things. And I just think that's a great question for all people to ask themselves is, what do you want your name to represent? And then I like Jon's phrasing of build up your name. build up your name through, to me, as I just contemplate on our conversation, it's this idea of, build up your name with your actions, build up your name with the things that you're doing and trying to put into the world. And it sort of goes back to that eulogy type of idea of what are the things that you're doing that people are going to remember? How do you make people feel? That's what your name means to me, and that's what it means to be building up your name. So anyway, if you've continued to listen this far, I appreciate you checking this out. As I mentioned before, you can find all of Jon's contact stuff in the description of this podcast, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you, all the listeners out there, and thank you very much.